Welcome to Taiwan Report News Brief, news analysis and context from Taichung, Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith. Up today, we've got multiple shows, and it's going to be in a slightly different format. This is based on a speech or a lecture I delivered at Tunghai University on Monday. And it starts off with background information on US-Taiwan relations. It's not going to be comprehensive, but the point of it is to cover all the major points that are relevant in today's discussion. If you're already somebody who knows in and out the Cairo Declaration, the Treaty of San Francisco, the Roger Lin versus United States case, you can probably skip ahead to the actual analysis of what's going on under the Biden administration. But this backgrounder, if you don't know these things, or you're just like hearing it again, then stick around. So let's get started. Modern US-Taiwan relations really start during World War II. The Allied powers and, of course, the Axis powers were at war. Remember that Taiwan at the time was under the Axis powers as a colony of the Japanese Empire. During World War II, the Allied powers issued the Cairo and Potsdam Declarations. In those, the Allied leaders, which included Chiang Kai-shek as the head of the Republic of China, they said that Taiwan and the pescadores, which is Penghu, would be returned to the Republic of China. The KMT is strongly in favor of these two and calls them major international agreements. On the other hand, the DPP and independence supporters will point out, which is correct, that the Cairo and Potsdam declarations were unsigned and essentially were just simply a memorandum of understanding or a declaration of intent and are not legally binding. The U.S. government, by the way, agrees with that assessment. The Allied command took over the Japanese Empire, and like Germany, it was partitioned between Allied governments. If you recall, Germany was split up into four parts. Eastern Germany was under the control of the Soviet Union. And then there were three other areas which were ruled by the United States, the UK, and I believe France was the other one. Similarly, Japan was split up between the United States, which held Japan proper, and the Republic of China, which was on behalf of the Allied powers entrusted with Taiwan. There were disagreements right after the post-war period within the U.S. government on what to do with Taiwan. President Truman at the time was seriously considering dumping Chiang Kai-shek. He felt that he was unreliable and corrupt and something of a dictator. Within the U.S. government, some wanted Taiwan to become an independent state. Some wanted it to become ruled under the UN to further determine what its status would be after a period of time, perhaps involving referendums of the public. There was not a whole lot of agreement. During this period, by the late 1940s, of course, there was the 228 incident and the major crackdown that happened then. But the ROC lost the Civil War. The Republic of China decamped to Taiwan, moving their government to Taipei. The Treaty of San Francisco, which was agreed on in 1951 and was promulgated in 1952, in that agreement, the Japanese Empire gave up or ceded their sovereignty over Taiwan. The problem is that there was disagreement among the Allied powers as to who would represent China, assuming that the Treaty of San Francisco was going to return sovereignty to China, as the wording was back in the day. Well, since no one could agree who was the real China or if it should be given back to China, as again they would say, the Treaty of San Francisco just simply leaves the question unanswered. Today, as a result of this, the US, the UK, and many countries consider Taiwan's status to be undetermined. That's very important. In other words, these countries, and they're mostly major powers, consider that Taiwan does not belong to China or to the Japanese Empire. It is undetermined. This was actually tested in a U.S. court case. The Taiwan civil government sued the U.S. government over this, and it's called Roger Lin versus the United States. In it, they argued that the U.S. still should have power over Taiwan. The U.S. courts took the case. They didn't throw it out, but the court ruling basically said, look, you're going to have to go back to the Allies to determine what the status of Taiwan is. And of course, good luck getting the Soviet Union on the phone. So, of course, that pretty much ended that. The Korean War really changed things in regards to US-Taiwan relations. Truman gave up on abandoning Chiang Kai-shek, and the new focus from the United States became containing communism in East Asia. During the 1950s, there was a US-ROC military alliance, and what they wanted to do was defend the first island chain. And those are the islands that include Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and it goes down through into Malaysia. What that does is it helps contain the Chinese Navy. Of course, the Chinese Navy can go out into the Pacific at any time. However, they're very easy to monitor from the first island chain, so it's considered strategically very important. It also helps defend the trade routes that supply Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and there's an awful lot of money that goes through there. And of course, the U.S. has military treaties to defend Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. During this period, U.S. troops were stationed in Taiwan. Advanced military hardware was sold to the Republic of China, which was used in the battles over Jinmen against the People's Republic. But eventually, as the 60s wore on, there was more and more pressure to recognize the government in Beijing as the government of China, which of course it was. The U.S. was hoping for a two-China solution in the UN, meaning that like North and South Korea, North and South Vietnam, and East and West Germany, there would be representation in the UN by both the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. Most likely, the People's Republic would have gone along with this, but Chiang Kai-shek absolutely refused, continuing to maintain that the government here in Taiwan represented all of China. So, the ROC delegation stormed out of the UN, and that was that. Then, in the late 70s, in 1979, the U.S. broke diplomatic ties with Taiwan. That also cut the military alliance, and U.S. troops went home. The U.S. Congress was alarmed by Jimmy Carter's move on this. So the U.S. Congress started putting together legislation to create what's now known as the Taiwan Relations Act. Carter's State Department tried to create their own language that was a bit more amenable to what the Carter administration's priorities were, but Congress said no. So let me just read two passages from that. The United States will make available to Taiwan such defense articles and defense services in such quantity as may be necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capabilities. And consider any effort to determine the future of Taiwan by other than peaceful means, including by boycotts or embargoes, a threat to the peace and security of the Western Pacific area and of grave concern to the United States. This launched a period of strategic ambiguity now that the military alliance was formally ended. Strategic ambiguity means that the United States will not say whether it will or whether it won't go to war with the People's Republic if the People's Liberation Army attacks Taiwan. In the early days, this made some sense. What they wanted to do is discourage Taiwan from changing the status quo, for example, declaring itself a Taiwan Republic, which the U.S. was afraid would launch a war with China, which is not in U.S. interests. On the other hand, it also helped keep China from making any unilateral moves to upset the status quo. Now, the situation is quite different today. Taiwan is a liberal democracy, not a dictatorship, which it was back when this started. And Taiwan has shown itself to be a responsible member of the international community. And the People's Republic of China now has the military capability to, if not necessarily take over Taiwan, but to give it a good run. We'll get back to strategic ambiguity in the next episode. So they created the American Institute in Taiwan to act as a de facto embassy. And the State Department put in a ton of rules on how and when government officials in the U.S. could meet with Taiwanese. A lot of these rules included not meeting on official property, the Taiwanese could not wear their official military uniforms, what the rank and type of U.S. government officials that could meet with Taiwanese. And there was a lot of them, like how Taiwanese could raise the flag when they could, when they couldn't, that kind of thing. It was all unilaterally imposed by the State Department on the U.S. It was all there intentionally to appease China. China never really asked for this. This was something that the U.S. voluntarily came up with on its own. Another little detail which is very important to understand is the difference between the One China policy and the One China principle. The One China policy, and there's various wording on this, but it is in all cases where it's a One China policy, it essentially means that the country, for example, the US, the UK, Japan, etc., they acknowledge or recognize that China believes that Taiwan is part of China. So all it's saying is, yeah, we know you think that. It doesn't affirm it. It doesn't agree with it. It just says, yeah, we know you think that. The One China principle. The One China principle is what China pushes in some countries, including Spain, for example. This is where they accept the idea that Taiwan is a part of China, period. If you see writers on Taiwan writing articles where they confuse these two, you really shouldn't trust the author. And we're going to break here, and I'll be back for part 2 of this series soon. So be sure to check it out.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。